There are a range of other options. Expansion of travel bans. Of course, we do currently have representatives in Russia, and Russia has representatives here. So there is a spectrum of things that we can do and that we'll keep under close consideration.
So could you expel diplomats?
No decisions in that regard have been taken at this stage. But as I say, these are all options that sit and are available to all countries in what are extraordinary circumstances.
If this escalates in Europe, what will you do to bring Kiwis home? Would you send in the military?
Yeah, so already we made contact, as you will have seen very early on, with New Zealanders registered as being in the Ukraine. Around 17 have been assisted or supported to leave. Some have decided to remain, and we continue to provide as much assistance as we can on safe routes to exit Ukraine. But as commercial options disappear, it does get more difficult. We have got our people stationed in the area, for instance, working around the surrounding area, working with others in the likes of Poland, should New Zealanders come into the area needing our support.
What about if it escalates further? I would say if other countries are drawn into the conflict, what would you do to get Kiwis out?
And that's just, as I've said, the most important thing we could do is give the advice to leave when people had the options to leave. We are now supporting people at this time when they can see the seriousness and the escalation to also leave. And the numbers now are relatively small. Really, it is a significant hypothetical to say what would happen if other countries are drawn in to a military campaign. For New Zealand, our focus at the moment is sending that strong, clear signal to Russia and to think about what support we can provide New Zealanders and also the refugee crisis that is likely to ensue.
Will you take refugees?
Again, these are very, very early days in this conflict, but we do know that within the EU, they're looking at the wider support that can be provided to those nations bordering the Ukraine who are likely to feel the pressure of people movement. So we'll look at what support can be provided more widely.
If Russia is being expansionary, if Russia forms, say, a military alliance with China, what would that mean for our relations with our largest trading partner?
Yeah, I wouldn't at this stage wish to hazard a guess on or really at this point pinpoint exactly where China is likely to position itself on this conflict. But what I can say is it will be very clear to everyone. There's almost it's a very widely held and very openly stated position by significant partners on what's happening here. And so very little distance between those in Europe and their response right now and the rest of the world.
But Putin and Xi Jinping did point out a joint statement around the time of the Winter Olympics saying that there were no forbidden areas of cooperation.
Yeah,
does that send a bit of a chill?
No, again, I would also caution about us making large assumptions at this point around their positioning. And I think the most important thing that we can continue to do is encourage diplomatic engagement and discussions that ensure that we don't see any further escalation. With Russia, obviously, that window has closed and the world is taking a very strong position in condemnation whilst continuing to reinforce the importance of diplomatic engagement. This was totally avoidable, totally. And so any loss of life that we see from this point forward must squarely sit on the shoulders of Russia choosing to take this action.
What were your thoughts when you first heard the bombs were dropping on Ukraine?
I was in absolute despair. I don't think anyone thought. Well, certainly within Europe, you hear that sentiment of, that this was a chapter in our history that we've, through so much work, through international diplomacy, the building up of multilateral institutions, people thought that the work had been done to try and prevent anything like this happening again. So it is with great despair I saw that news.
Let's turn to the protest that's been happening outside Parliament. It's still active, very active. But at the beginning, were you naive to think that it might just fizzle out?
No, and nor do I believe that I've stated that. In fact, it's early-ish on, I did say that in my view, it may take some time, and that has proven to be the case. But that does not change the position that we've taken all the way through. We will not engage with individuals who are taking part in illegal activity as part of a protest because it goes well beyond a protest.
But at the very beginning it was perfectly legal, say on day one. If you'd engaged then or sent somebody to engage, would it have diffused the whole situation?
I don't believe so, no. Particularly,
the politicians often go down and talk to petitioners and protesters.
Absolutely. And this is actually a point that we've made to the protest, is that, we've had much larger protests than even what we've seen here. They come, they often have engagement with politicians, they'll often even speak on the forecourt. I've spoken on the forecourt of protests. The point is made, the engagement occurs, and then people disperse. What we saw here was very quickly individuals coming onto the site and building structures, creating a permanence, and abusing the people who were around them, who were doing things simply like wearing masks. So it was very quickly evident that this was not a protest here to engage in the peaceful statement or sharing of a view, but those who are willing to engage in illegal activity.
So this has happened in Canada. They employed emergency powers to bring that protest to an end. Would you do the same?
At this point, the police have not asked or sought those powers, and in doing so have really demonstrated in their view they have what is required to continue to manage the protest.
Were you surprised when that Horizon poll came out showing 30% support for the protesters?
And yet I've seen others that have a lower number. Look, at any given time, there will always be a group of individuals who disagree with the government's actions, and that's always the case.
Yeah, but Christopher Luxon says that you're leading the most divisive government in recent times.
I totally disagree with that. Having a group of people, albeit a small one, who disagree with the steps we've taken to keep people safe does not mean the whole country is divided. It means that there is a difference of opinion, albeit a strongly held one, and one that I do believe in the very near future people will move on from, because the measures we have to take for people's safety will change.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that in just a sec, but Paul Hunt, the Human Rights Commissioner, has engaged. He's holding conciliation process with some of the protesters who have agreed to be respectful. Will the government take part in that? We've
made our position very clear. And in fact, every parliamentary party represented here in Parliament made the same stance, that whilst there was illegal activity, the throwing of human waste, the abuse of students going to school, that what kind of message would it send to engage with that behaviour? It almost condones it and says that if you disagree with a government policy, you can engage in illegal activity and have that policy changed. That just wouldn't be right.
But if you engage just with the people that are going to be respectful, would that not ease some of the divisions that the mandates have created?
Well, again, also, at the same time, we've spoken to the timelines we believe that we'll need to have things like vaccine mandates and passes. We've talked about how once we come off the peak and we've seen that our hospitals and our health system is being able to cope, we will be able to move on from them.
Well, can we give people certainty then?
Well,
when is that going to happen?
In a pandemic, that's actually, I would have thought, a really significant guide, saying and making it clear that once we hit that peak and come down and we've seen our hospitalisations stable and we know that it's safe, that we are committed to removing those things.
So have you identified when that will happen? When will it be safe to take these mandates away?
Well, that is exactly what we've done. We've stated the criteria that's required. What you're asking me to do is predict precisely when New Zealand will pick a peak and decline.
No, but not a
date. Do that.
Not a date, but say with cases halve, or you only have 100 cases in hospitalisation.
Well, actually, in many ways you could say we've done that by talking about hospitalisations normalising and our health system coping, which is actually the exact criteria we set when we created the traffic light system. We've always said it hasn't been about case numbers anymore with Omicron, very different to what we've seen with others, because we are vaccinated. We know that actually we can now safely have cases in the country and not have as many restrictions. But we won't know our ability to cope till we have peaked. So I will not remove safety protections for all New Zealanders based on the protests of a few if it jeopardises their health.
OK. Just one last question on the protest. Winston Peters has been amongst the protesters. If this gets him re-elected, would you rule out working with him in the future? Yes or no?
Look, I disagree with the fact that individuals have chosen to embolden people who are undertaking illegal behaviour. So, whether or not that's a politician or anyone else, I would say to anyone choosing to join. But
in particular, Winston Peters, would you rule out working with him because of what he's done?
These are all hypotheticals, but I think it does demonstrate the strong distance that sits between us on these issues.
I'll take that as a yes. OK. Let's talk about testing. PCR testing, the labs have been overwhelmed when the average rate has been 29,000 tests a day. It's way below the baseline that the government stated of 58,000, or even a surge capacity of 77,000. Have you been sort of giving a false sense of security about our testing capacity?
No, absolutely not. In fact, just in this very room, I believe last week, we talked about the fact that the baseline you've mentioned, and we've been clear on this from the beginning, is when we have a low positivity rate, because that's when we're able to pull samples. When you have a high number of cases, the baseline shifts, and we stated this from the very beginning, and it shifts to more like 35,000 tests because you can't pull samples anymore.
Right.
So we needed to move to that some time ago, and we indicated that once we're in that position, we needed to bring in rapid antigen tests. That's exactly what we've done.
This is about keeping people out of hospital or keeping people out of ICU, but hospitals say they're understaffed. You want care in the community, but GPs say they're overwhelmed. They issued a red letter saying they're over a lack of consultation, and you also have technicians, contact tracers threatening a strike. Is there a communication breakdown between the government and the health sector here?
No, I would disagree with that. In fact, our health sector has been remarkable. Our lab workers, 2 years they've been under the pump with this pandemic.
But they obviously are fed up.
Oh, well, again, I'm not going to get into a pay dispute because obviously the strike notice relates to those issues predominantly. But all the way through, we've worked really closely with our health sector on our response. It was science-based and evidence-based.
I'll push back on that, though, because the GPs have issued this red letter saying lack of consultation.
Well, again, all I can say on that is that as soon as we saw the red letter, work was done immediately to resolve the issues they were raising over things like access to PPE and RATs. But I would point out there was a meeting with the GPs the day prior. The issue of the red letter was not raised, but that does not mean that we can't work to resolve those issues very quickly, and we are.
Why would they issue a red letter the day after you've had a meeting with them?
That would be a question for the association rather than
So they're not raising the issues? Are you accusing them of not raising the issues with you?
No. Again, as I've said, the issues that they're raising, we're working very quickly to work through. But actually, when you look at the outcomes that our care in the community system has already demonstrated, the success of that program, a very difficult thing to scale up as quickly as everyone has in primary care, our community providers. Yet compared to other countries, it's been hugely successful. We have not, at a large scale, lost people's lives when they've been cared for at home. And that is significant, and I know that's what we're all working towards.
Let's talk about what's happening on Monday. New Zealand is finally opening up, beginning to open up. Right, so that's a big day.
Yes.
But why are you doing that when the peak of Omicron hasn't even hit yet?
Well, the advice that we had right from the beginning was that actually the issue of seeding new cases reduces once you are reaching a level where you have a high level of community outbreak.
Right.
And so that is essentially what all of our experts advised us, that while you're trying to slow it down, keep slowing it down. It's given us the chance to have...
But will that extend the peak if you're opening up?
No, not necessarily, no. In fact, one of the things you want to be careful of is as you're making these readjustments, making sure you think about things like winter time as you make them. But just so everyone, I think, knows how much we appreciate the work to slow it down by having people isolate when we did, or the measures at the border. Slowing it down meant that 70% almost of our eligible population is boosted. And that will make all the difference to this outbreak.
Right, so you're committed to opening up.
Yes, we are.
Why not just bring in the tourists without self-isolation? You could revive our biggest export earner that way. And actually, Bloomfield has advised you that it doesn't really make sense in phase 3 settings.
Well, our self-isolation periods will continue to change, and we signalled that at the time we announced all our changes. We've actually asked our team of advisors we're using, led by Professor David Skegg, to give us rapid advice on isolation periods for those coming in at the border. We're expecting that shortly.
So Monday, will Cabinet say no more isolation?
I don't believe we'll have it that soon, but once we receive it, we will turn it around quickly because all of those decisions have been very clearly based on the science. When we can move, we will. We know that it will make an absolute difference, not only to Kiwis coming home, but to the visitors we want back on our shores.
Because self-isolation is keeping not only the tourists away, but the airlines are not committing to New Zealand because of that particular policy.
We're well aware of the timelines they're working to. What we want to make sure is that, we get New Zealand through this, what will be a difficult few weeks.
Right, so...
But then... things will change more quickly than I think people appreciate.
Okay, so can you give us a commitment? 2 weeks self-isolation?
So I am happy to give commitments when I have the strength of that strong advice to stand
4
behind.
weeks?
And I do believe that we'll receive it in pretty quick order, and we'll turn it around in quick time as well.
Pandemic, as you know, has had a big financial impact on people. Do you accept that the mandates have had a negative financial impact on families?
Do you know what? Everything we've had to do in this pandemic, in our response, has always been about the best of the worst options. So yes, I accept that they've had an impact, and that's why we gave it really hard consideration. But the alternative was A, putting people at risk in vulnerable situations, and B, everyone living with a high level of restriction.
Middle New Zealand is also starting to suffer as well. Cost of living is skyrocketing and wages aren't keeping up with that. What can you offer to Middle New Zealand to keep them flush?
Well, look, what we're seeing around the world is, yes, cost of living pressures, particularly linked into that COVID recovery period. So we are absolutely mindful of what New Zealanders are facing, and that's one of the reasons we will keep doing what we have always done as a government, particularly focused on our lower middle income earners.
Yeah.
So coming through the system in April, for instance, an increase in the family tax credit, which a large number of our lower middle income families will benefit from. We've also committed to that increase in the minimum wage, and we do, for those who are on government support, have the additional lift in benefits in April too.
On the minimum wage though, by raising that, you're pushing some minimum wage earners into a higher tax bracket. Is that something that you're going to address?
At this stage, we're not in the position to be making adjustments to tax rates, and of course that is also one of the things that causes inflationary pressure.
Interest rates are tracking up as well, as long as you've got inflation
off historically low rates.
Yeah, off historically, but they're tracking up. I mean, is it a silver lining for you that maybe the housing market is going to take a dive?
Well, look, we have always said as well that for many people in home ownership, that's their biggest asset. And so all the way through, we've had this focus on making sure that we didn't see this ongoing skyrocketing of prices and that we saw stabilisation in the market, but also being mindful that a housing crash has a huge negative impact on families as well. We know the part we can play, pulling the levers on adjusting the market so we've got more first home buyers, fewer investors putting pressure on the market, and we've seen that impact. Yeah. And it is having an effect.
But is it your ideal scenario that the housing market does take a dip? It started to? Is that your ideal scenario?
I want it to be affordable, and it's not right now. But
so that's a yes, the housing market's got to go down.
The reason I'm just putting in a bit more into these answers is because it's not just about the price of housing; it's also what's happening with people's incomes as well. That's obviously what affects affordability. Which are not keeping up with inflation either. But across the period that we have been in government, wage increases have outstripped the increases in cost of living, and we need more of that. Yep. And so yes, we are in a tough period right now, and I know New Zealanders are feeling that, particularly at the pump. The price of crude oil has had a real impact here, and I sadly,
even more with the war.
With Ukraine, it will potentially get worse. But we also have forecasting from economists suggesting, of course, that we will see a peak and that we will come away from those increases in inflation as well.
The reason I dwell on this cost of living is because of this new Ipsos poll that came out, which shows that National is being seen by Kiwis as able to do better job than Labor on 4 of the 5 top issues, and they include housing, cost of living and the economy.
So, I would obviously dispute that.
Yeah, but you attracted 20% of National voters at the last election. Does that mean you're just about to lose that base that you attracted over?
I don't believe so, but again, rather than just give my opinion, for me it all comes back to those indicators of how we're doing now. I mean, when you think about the fact that we've not only come through a health crisis, but this is a 1 in 100 year economic crisis, and yet we have some of the lowest unemployment in the OECD. We've had growth in our economy. Our debt levels relative to other countries remain low even after this period. So that, to me, those are the indicators that we have done the job that New Zealanders wanted us to do, kept them in work, and helping to get the economy through and then thriving in the aftermath.
So we've got another challenge now, obviously, with the war in Ukraine.
Yes.
And in May, you're off to the United States.
Yes.
OK. Given the world situation, how urgent is it now that we secure a free trade deal with America?
Yeah, I would actually highlight the importance of our free trade agreements with Europe. London and the UK agreement has been a great success for us. We're now focused on the EU FTA. And in America, it'll be very much focused on some specific industry interests that we have, and I'll be looking to really support our exporters on that visit.
Right, so not a free trade agreement, but particular industries?
Yeah, targeting our approach there, because there are industries where we have been really successful and there's opportunities for us.
Have the Americans ruled out a free trade agreement? Is that
No,
right?
no, but also we're also very mindful of some of the positioning of the United States on trade issues, and it's
Right.
about focusing our attentions and energies on where we can make good gains.
We're looking for the peak to be over in Omicron. Are you confident that heading overseas then is the right thing to do?
Oh, yes, I'm confident about that, because now is the time for us to reconnect, and we are.
And when that peak is over, just finally, can you tell me what your number one priority is for the rest of the year?
Now, for me, it is all about moving into a new horizon in our recovery period. New Zealand has done an incredible job. This year is about seeing the light, and there is light.
And are you confident, looking back, that you have done an incredible job?
I think history will tell New Zealand's story, our story as a whole, our story as a team. And yes, there have been hard moments. No one could expect you would go through a pandemic without there being difficult moments and times when people disagree. But history will tell New Zealand's story.
Prime Minister, thank you for your time.
Thank you.